Yeah, the thing I find most tricky is when people don't recognize you particularly, but half recognize.
I've made the whole world laugh for 40 years, but there's a truth I've kept hidden for 24 years. A truth that if you're a Mr. Bean fan, you might never forgive me for everyone believing my marriage to Sunetra Sastry was peaceful, perfect, happy, a fairy tale between an eccentric comedian and a gentle woman working behind the scenes. But have you ever wondered why a 24-year marriage fell apart in just a few months? Why did the woman who stood by me before I was even famous disappear from my life without a single word of blame? Why is it that an actor who lives to make the world laugh couldn't manage to keep a smile on his own wife's face? And more importantly, why did I, Rowan Atkinson, become the worst kind of man without even realizing it? What made me that way? Do you want to know what happened that night? The Knights looked at me with nothing but hatred in her eyes. Do you want to know the real reason why the British press called me the worst husband in the UK in 2015? Do you want to know what really happened between me and the woman nearly 30 years younger than me? I'm going to tell you everything. No hiding, no excuses, no jokes. Because at 70, I've come to understand that some truths, if left unspoken, will eat away at you for the rest of your life. The only question is, do you have the courage to listen to this story until the very last word? I still remember very clearly the first day I met Sunetra. It was a cold day in the late 1980s around the end of 1986 at the BBC studios in London where we were filming Blackadder 2. Back then, I wasn't Mr. Bean. I was just Rowan Atkinson, a comedian trying to keep up with the frantic pace of BBC productions. I walked into the makeup room like I did every day, script in hand, still thinking about a scene. And then I saw her, Sunetra Sastry, the girl with deep eyes, black hair, and a calm exterior that somehow lit up the whole room with a strange kind of glow. She was a makeup artist for the BBC working with the crew. Honestly, I had met plenty of beautiful women on set, but Sunetra had a quiet kind of charm. She didn't try to get anyone's attention. She just worked diligently and silently, and that very silence made people want to be near her. I cracked a few jokes. She smiled, and the way she smiled made me feel lighter. On set, everyone laughed because of me. But Sunetra was the first person who made me laugh just by being myself. Do you understand the difference? Someone laughs because you're Mr. Funny Guy, but someone else laughs because they see the real you. Awkward, tired, a bit silly, and always hiding fear behind the jokes. In the weeks that followed, I started arriving at the makeup room a few minutes earlier. I'd pretend to ask about foundation, lighting, or how to prepare makeup for the character. But really, I just wanted to hear her speak. Sunetra didn't talk much, but when she did, she was direct and to the point. And I, someone who always used words to mask his emotions, found myself drawn to that clarity. By 1987, we began having dinner after shoots. Not fancy Hollywood dates, just small spots in London where I could sit down, stop being the world's clown, and go back to being an ordinary man with an ordinary woman. I remember one time she looked at me and said, "Rowan, you smile more on the inside than you do on the outside." I was speechless. She was the first to ever see that in me. From 1987 to 1989, our love grew slowly but genuinely. I didn't fall for Sunetra like a lightning strike. I loved her the way you come to love a home, stepping in gradually and one day realizing you never want to leave. In the evenings at my small flat, we'd watch TV, eat cold meals, and talk about things I'd never told even my closest friends. She told me about her childhood, her Anglo-Indian roots, and how she often felt like she never fully belonged anywhere. I listened and was surprised to realize I felt the same. I've always belonged to the stage, but nowhere once the lights went off. Then one evening in September 1989, I brought her to meet some friends after a show. Everyone liked her. She was still quiet, still reserved, but the way she listened made people trust her. I sat next to her and for the first time in years felt like I didn't need to perform anymore. And so in February 1990, we got married. It wasn't a loud or flashy wedding, just family, a few close friends, and an innocent belief that if our love was real enough, life would be kind to us. At the time, I thought Sunetra was the only peaceful place I could hold on to in the middle of a career blowing up like a balloon. And I believe she thought she could live beside a man who made the world laugh. But there was something I didn't see. Do you know what the most dangerous thing in a marriage is? It's not fighting. It's not betrayal. It's when two people start living in two different rhythms, but keep telling themselves everything's fine. And if you're wondering, when did that storm begin? When did Sunetra start fading from my life? And why did the man who made the world laugh make his wife cry in silence? Press 1 to find out. I still remember very clearly that winter night in 1990, just 2 months after our wedding. It was so quiet I could hear the wind scratching against the glass. Sunetra was sitting by the bed, her eyes red from crying. I had just returned from a commercial shoot in Manchester 3 hours later than planned. At the time, I just smiled and said, "I'm sorry. You know how it is. Work." But I didn't realize that moment was the first crack. A crack that would grow into a bottomless rift in our marriage. In 1995, I began filming a new season of Mr. Bean. My schedule was packed. Some days I'd leave the house at 4 a.m. and return at 11 p.m. Sunetra looked at me as if I were just a guest renting a room for the night, and I started avoiding conversations with her because I was afraid. Afraid I'd hear the questions I didn't want to answer. Do you still love me? Does this family still matter to you? Why were those questions so terrifying? Because I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answers. I remember January 20th, 1997, our daughter Lily's birthday. I had promised I would be there. All week long, I told everyone that day was reserved for her, but one call from the BBC crew pulled me away. I left home at 9 a.m. They said just 1 hour. It turned into 10. That night when I came back, the cake had been blown out, the party cleaned up, and Sunetra said only 3 words. She waited, Rowan. I took off my coat, stood in the kitchen, and realized for the first time that her eyes no longer held love, only disappointment. And I asked myself, when a man loses the trust of his wife, what's left for him to hold on to? But that was only the second crack. In 2001, I fell into a strange kind of pressure, the pressure to maintain the global image of Mr. Bean. That image became a mask I couldn't take off. The more famous I became, the smaller I felt inside. And while the world celebrated me, Sunetra was the one who witnessed the trembling, irritable, cold version of me after endless days on set. There were nights I came home and spoke to her in Mr. Bean's voice. Not as a joke, not in character, but as if I had forgotten my own voice. Sunetra sat there, hands trembling, and asked me, "Rowan, are you okay?" I just said, "Yeah, I think so." But deep down, I knew I was slipping away from real life. Then in 2002, we had our first major argument. It wasn't about infidelity. It wasn't about money. It was because I was no longer the Rowan Atkinson she had fallen in love with. "You're never here," she said. "Even when you're home, your mind is somewhere else." She was right. I'd been in a million places, but never truly beside my wife. But the tragedy didn't come from the arguments. It came from the silence. In 2004, during a film tour in Berlin, I realized I had forgotten our wedding anniversary. 2 weeks after I got back, Sunetra brought it up. She said it in a tone so calm it was frightening. The calm of someone who had stopped hoping. I tried to make up for it. I planned a fancy dinner in London. But through the entire meal, she never looked me in the eye. No complaints, no anger, just nothing left to say. Do you know what's scarier than anger? The silence of someone who once loved you with all their heart. In 2006, the crack turned into a void. We lived in the same house, but no longer lived together. I worked more and more to avoid facing the truth, and the more I ran, the more I slowly killed the marriage. Sunetra became increasingly exhausted from raising 2 children, from her job, from having to protect her husband's image. Do you know what haunts me the most to this day? In 2006, the doctor said Sunetra was suffering from stress-induced exhaustion. I heard that news from the housekeeper, not from her. Not because she didn't want to tell me, but because she knew I wouldn't have time to listen. I became the man who didn't want to be home, and she became the woman who didn't dare call her husband her husband. In 2008, filming for Johnny English Reborn began. The pressure was immense. I was constantly overseas. Our video calls went from every day to every 3 days, then once a week, and finally every now and then. I lied to myself saying, things will be fine once the movie's done. But marriage isn't like a film. You can't just cut the scene and fix it later. Then came 2009, the fateful year. The year I did something I regret to this day. During a BBC radio taping, I met a young woman, a makeup artist, someone who made me feel like myself, not Mr. Bean, not a character, not a star. She smiled at me in a way I hadn't for a long time, and I responded like a weak man. I didn't betray my wife physically in 2009, but I betrayed her in my mind. That evening when I returned home to Oxfordshire, Sunetra was standing at the door. She asked me one question. "Rowan, is there something you haven't told me?" I stayed silent for 30 seconds, and those 30 seconds of silence killed my marriage. Sunetra turned and walked away. I wanted to go after her, but do you know the only thing I did? I poured myself a drink and sat alone in the dark living room staring at our 1990 wedding photo. I looked at her face and for the first time felt truly despicable. Some people destroy their marriage through obvious betrayal. I destroyed mine through absence, through a lack of love, a lack of honesty, and ultimately a lack of courage. 2010 marked the moment I began pulling away from my life more than ever before. She was still in the house, still caring for the children, still preserving the image of our family in front of the media. But I knew she had closed her heart. And I realized a marriage doesn't die in a single day. It dies in the thousands of small moments you chose to ignore. In 2006, the crack turned into a void. We lived in the same house, but no longer lived together. I worked more and more to avoid facing the truth, and the more I ran, the more I slowly killed the marriage. Sunetra became increasingly exhausted from raising 2 children, from her job, from having to protect her husband's image. Do you know what haunts me the most to this day? In 2006, the doctor said Sunetra was suffering from stress-induced exhaustion. I heard that news from the housekeeper, not from her. Not because she didn't want to tell me, but because she knew I wouldn't have time to listen. I became the man who didn't want to be home, and she became the woman who didn't dare call her husband her husband. In 2008, filming for Johnny English Reborn began. The pressure was immense. I was constantly overseas. Our video calls went from every day to every 3 days, then once a week, and finally every now and then. I lied to myself, saying things will be fine once the movie's done. But marriage isn't like a film. You can't just cut the scene and fix it later. Then came 2009, the fateful year. The year I did something I regret to this day. During a BBC radio taping, I met a young woman, a makeup artist, someone who made me feel like myself. Not Mr. Bean, not a character, not a star. She smiled at me in a way hadn't for a long time, and I responded like a weak man. I didn't betray my wife physically in 2009, but I betrayed her in my mind. That evening, when I returned home to Oxfordshire, Sunetra was standing at the door. She asked me one question. "Rowan, is there something you haven't told me?" I stayed silent for 30 seconds, and those 30 seconds of silence killed my marriage. Sunetra turned and walked away. I wanted to go after her, but do you know the only thing I did? I poured myself a drink and sat alone in the dark living room, staring at our 1990 wedding photo. I looked at her face and for the first time felt truly despicable. Some people destroy their marriage through obvious betrayal. I destroyed mine through absence, through a lack of love, a lack of honesty, and ultimately a lack of courage. Tuthico 2010 marked the moment I began pulling away from my life more than ever before. She was still in the house, still caring for the children, still preserving the image of our family in front of the media. But I knew she had closed her heart, and I realized a marriage doesn't die in a single day. It dies in the thousands of small moments you chose to ignore. By January 2013, everything had become impossible to hide. The press caught a photo of me walking with Louise after a performance. Just the 2 of us walking. No hand-holding, no inappropriate behavior. But one photo was enough. Because my eyes in that photo said more than anything else. I was no longer the man of my own family. I had become someone searching for an escape. A coward's escape. Sunetra saw that photo before I even had a chance to explain. That night, she said something to me I will never forget. "I've been waiting for you to come back for 10 years, but maybe the person you want to return to isn't me anymore." I didn't know what to say because she was right. 2014 was the year our marriage officially died. Even though we wouldn't be in court for another year, Louise didn't enter my life as someone trying to destroy a marriage, but as someone who made me realize just how much I had already lost in it. But Sunetra could never see it that way. How could a wife look at the man she had lived with for 24 years and accept sharing him with a woman nearly 30 years younger? She couldn't. No one could. On the night of October 14th, 2014, in a house so big that even footsteps echoed, Sunetra closed the bedroom door. That door closed softly, very softly. But its sound hurt more than any scream. Do you know what that sound was? It was the end. It was a goodbye left unsaid. It was the moment I lost my wife forever. In 2015, we went to court. I, Rowan Atkinson, the man the world considered the funniest, stood silent before a judge while my wife's lawyer said I had been unreasonable and had abandoned the family. In the first 65 seconds of the hearing, I cried. Not because of the verdict, but because of Sunetra's eyes. They no longer belonged to the woman who loved me in 1986. No longer the girl who looked at my silly grin and called me adorable. They were the eyes of someone I had hurt beyond repair. The hearing lasted 45 minutes. My 24-year marriage ended in less than an hour. After the hearing, I stood in the hallway shaking like a child. Louise messaged me asking if I was okay, but the truth is, even if the whole world had asked me, "Are you okay?" At that moment, I wouldn't have been able to answer because I knew at that moment I didn't just lose Sunetra. I lost a part of myself. Do you know what hurts the most? It's not losing the one you love. It's realizing you were the one who pushed them away. From 2011 to 2015, I gradually destroyed my own marriage. Not with one big mistake, but with thousands of small ones. A message I shouldn't have sent. A word I should have said but didn't. A moment when I should have been there, but I wasn't. Marriage never dies from one blow. It dies when someone stops trying. And that someone was me. On November 10, 2015, as the doors of the London County Court closed behind my divorce hearing, it felt as though the entire world closed with them. There was no applause, no studio lights, no familiar laughter I had spent nearly half my life creating. Only the heavy sound of my footsteps echoing down a long hallway, so cold it made my skin crawl. In that exact moment, I realized I had entered what the media would later call the dark years. And the truth is, they were even darker than anyone knew. Just 3 days after the hearing, British media exploded with headlines. Rowan Atkinson leaves wife of 24 years for a young actress. Mr. Bean betrays Sunetra, the woman who sacrificed her life for a man who didn't deserve her. I became a target for the press, for TV, for social media, and worst of all, for the very fans who once loved me more than I loved myself. They called me every name imaginable. They sent me curses. They made me the villain in my own story, even though they'd never heard me say a single word. And the terrifying part was they weren't entirely wrong. The early months of 2016 were a time when I couldn't bring myself to open a newspaper, turn on the TV, read an email, or answer a phone call. I lived like a shadow in the Hampstead estate. Even the staff avoided making eye contact with me. I knew they felt fortunate. Music Louise sometimes tried to help me get through it by saying, "Time will heal." But time can't do anything when you've become the target of an entire nation thirsting for blood. Because people didn't hate me for what I had done. They hated me for what they thought I had done. And that judgment weighed heavier than guilt. In the early days of the breakup, I came to one single realization. I had lost Sunetra. I lost the woman who held my hand when I was no one. I lost the family I had spent half a lifetime building. I lost the trust of my children. I lost myself. And the cruelest part was this. People only cared that I was Mr. Bean, but no one wanted to know who Rowan Atkinson really was. My pain wasn't sensational enough for the media to care. In February 2016, during a press conference for Johnny English Strikes Again, a reporter stood up and asked directly, "Do you consider yourself a home wrecker?" I remember that moment clearly. I held the microphone, my hands shaking. I had to fight not to cry. I wanted to scream, "I didn't betray Sunetra the way you think. I betrayed her in the most painful way by no longer loving her the way she deserved to be loved." But I couldn't say that in front of 300 people. I just looked down and said, "I'm human and I made mistakes." That was the most honest thing I ever said to the media, but they cut the second half of the sentence and kept only the headline, "I made mistakes." They wanted me to be the villain. I understood that, and I stopped trying to explain. In June 2016, I decided to pause everything. I stopped taking roles, turned down interviews, and disappeared from the public eye. I hid away in a small house I owned in Devon, a place no one knew about. I woke up every morning not knowing what to do except walk. I walked for miles each day, just to forget the sound of laughter I had spent my life creating, a sound that now pierced me like a knife. Some nights I didn't sleep at all. I just sat and stared at the sea. Louise would ask me, "What are you thinking about?" How could I tell her I was thinking about another woman? I stayed silent, and she misunderstood completely. By the end of 2016, I realized the consequences of the divorce weren't just in the media. They were in the very relationships I thought were unshakable. Friends began to distance themselves. A few colleagues refused to work with me. A director I had collaborated with for years hinted, "Audiences love a cheerful Mr. Bean, not a controversial Rowan Atkinson." People forgot I was an actor. They expected me to always be the goofy man who made them laugh. When I was in pain, they didn't allow me to feel it. When I made mistakes, they didn't allow me to be forgiven. The breaking point came in January 2017 when the media discovered I had moved in with Louise. The headlines read, "Mr. Bean builds a new home, leaving his old family behind." But I hadn't left anyone behind. I was just trying to start over, even if it was too late. But the media didn't care. They wanted blood. They wanted a story. And the story had to cast me as the most despicable kind of traitor. Meanwhile, Sunetra, a smart and private woman, chose silence. But that silence only made things worse. People saw her as the perfect victim, and me without trial as the villain. In 2018, I tried to rewrite my life. I threw myself into my work. I worked harder than ever to fill the hollow inside me. I tried to create joy for others, even though I couldn't find it for myself. Louise became the only person by my side during those years. She was young, loving, understanding, but our relationship always lived under the long shadow of Sunetra. Not a single day passed without me thinking about what I had done. In March 2019, the press came for me one last time, and this blow nearly broke me completely. They ran the headline, "Louise pregnant with Rowan Atkinson's child." They called me irresponsible. They called me selfish. They said I replaced my family like I'd swap out a prop in a film. I didn't respond. I said nothing. But inside, I knew I was entering an entirely new chapter. One where I'd pay the price for everything I had done wrong. And in 2019, for the first time in years, I looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't see Mr. Bean. I didn't see the fame. I only saw a 64-year-old man with eyes so tired he didn't recognize himself. I asked Rowan, how did you let it get this far? But the answer never came because the only real answer was it was too late to fix it. I lost my wife. I lost my family. I lost my reputation. I lost the respect of millions. And the cruelest part is I lost the best part of myself in a love story I let fall apart. After 2019, when the media put the final period on the darkest chapter of my life with the news of Lewis's pregnancy, I thought I'd be buried forever beneath public scorn. But something strange happened. I began to feel something I hadn't felt in over a decade. Peace, not because everything was okay, but because I had nothing left to lose. Sometimes when a man loses everything, he finds himself in the ashes. In 2020, when the world came to a halt during the pandemic, I found myself for the first time in decades simply at home. No sets, no cameras, no grueling schedules, just the silence of my house, the sound of my own breath, and Louise, the woman who had walked with me through the fiercest storm of my life. That same year, my third daughter was born. People asked if I felt ashamed to become a father at 65. I just smiled. Becoming a father at any age is a miracle, and sometimes that miracle is what saves a soul torn apart. But I won't lie. I know my old family, Sunetra, and our two children, Lily and Ben, still carry wounds that haven't healed. I don't blame them. I don't expect their forgiveness. In 2021, Lily sent me a short message. I'm okay. Hope you are too. I read that message dozens of times. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't close, but it was a slightly open door. A door I didn't dare knock on too hard for fear it would slam shut again. I replied, I'm always here whenever you're ready. And I waited patiently without pressure, without expectation, awaiting the way a father waits, knowing he once lost more than he can ever make up for. My career took a strange turn too. People thought I'd vanish after the scandals. But in 2022, Netflix approached me with a role in Man vs. Bee. They called me an enduring icon of British comedy, a compliment that caught in my throat. I didn't feel worthy of it, but I accepted the role, not to chase fame again, but because I needed to know, could I still make people laugh after nearly a decade of not being able to smile at myself? When the show was released, I received thousands of messages from viewers all over the world. One message made me cry. You made me laugh during the hardest time of my life. Thank you, Mr. Bean. I read that line over and over, and I realized maybe my light hadn't gone out. Maybe my career wasn't over. Maybe the definition of value changes with time. When I was young, I made people laugh with Mr. Bean's silliness. At 70, I make people smile simply by existing. Proof that even when you mess up, you can still get back up again. But my life now isn't picture perfect. From 2022 to 2024, I've lived between two worlds. One filled with Louise and our young child. Laughter, hope, and peaceful mornings. And another buried deep inside my chest. A world of memories with Sunetra, with our two grown children, with the years I destroyed through my own carelessness. I don't regret loving Louise, but I do regret letting my first marriage fall apart in such a painful way. If you asked me, if you could go back, would you do things differently? I'd say, I wouldn't let my career erode my love. I wouldn't let the world's laughter be louder than my wife's tears. I wouldn't become a stranger in my own home. In 2023, Sunetra and I had a brief meeting, not to get back together, not to rehash old wounds, just to look into each other's eyes as two people who had once loved each other for nearly 30 years. She was calm, wiser, beautiful in a way only someone who's endured pain and risen from it can be. I apologized. No poetry, no long speeches, just one sentence. I'm sorry I wasn't the man you deserved. She nodded. No forgiveness, no blame, just a nod, as if to close a chapter that had dragged on too long. As for me, at 70, I've slowed down. I spend more time with my youngest child, cooking, gardening, and reading. I rarely attend big events. I'm no longer trying to make the whole world laugh. I just want to make the people I love smile. Louise, my new family, Lily, and Ben, when they need me, even if it's just through a message. And myself, a man who had to relearn how to breathe after years of chaos. The strangest part of looking back on my entire life is that I don't see a brilliant career or iconic performances. I see one thing: family. The thing I once lost and now must protect at all costs. I'm not a hero. I'm not a flawless icon. I'm just a man who got it wrong and is trying to get it right one more time. When you're 70, you realize the spotlight doesn't matter. The money doesn't matter. Fame doesn't matter. The only thing that lets a man sleep at night is knowing he's finally become the person he always meant to be. I'm not perfect. I still carry wounds that haven't healed. But for the first time in decades, I feel like I'm alive. Not running, not hiding, not performing, just living. And maybe that's the greatest miracle of this final chapter of my life. If you've read this far, maybe you felt what I once felt too. No marriage breaks in an instant. It breaks in the quiet moments we convince ourselves it's fine. So now I want to ask you, not as a performer, but as someone who's walked through the hell of a broken marriage, do you think I deserve forgiveness after 10 years of trying to make things right? Please write yes or no. Heat.